Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I am very happy that today my guest is Alan Ayre because we are talking about something that we don't often get the chance to talk about on this channel, and that is astro mapping. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Anna. Nice to meet you, and thanks for inviting me on for a chat.
Well, I heard your talk and I thought that would be a very good conversation to have on Lightways. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are familiar with astrocartography, but not so familiar with astro mapping. So can you first of all tell us what astro mapping actually is?
Okay. So, astrolocality. So, astro mapping would be both, really. It's astrolocality and astrocartography. So, one map would be generated with both lines on it. So, the basis of both is the horoscope. So, everything in astro mapping is derived from the birth chart. Now, astrolocality is where you were born becomes your magnetic center. And then the planets, as disposed at the moment of birth, generate lines radiating out from that place. So I found that to be very powerful. And these lines respond to transits and they unfold along with the birth chart. So over time and in space, if you like, the horoscope as our subjective reality, without all its potential and challenges and opportunities, becomes our objective reality when we play the part in the 3D world. So astrolocality are the lines generated from the point where we were born, our birthplace. Now, astrocartography, so we're going back to the 1990s. Astrolocality has been around for a very long time. Not many books written on it. But in the 1990s, Jim Lewis wrote a book, I don't know if you've come across it, The Psychology of Astrocartography, which kind of incorporated parts of astrolocality, but then he devised a system of generating lines that are more psychological and subjective. So astrocartography produces lines around the world, not necessarily from your birthplace, but where the sun, say, if we take the sun sign, where the sun would be at sunrise, at its culmination, when it was setting, and at the IC. So you've got 4 lines generating astrocartography, which can be anywhere in the world. So if we were born at 10 o'clock in London in the summer, there wouldn't be any lines going through London. They could be, well, there would be somewhere else, moving around the globe every 90 degrees. So that's astrocartography. I found that does work, but it's not as powerful. It's more subtle and more subjective. Now, when you put the two together, where you get crossing lines, where the astrolocality lines cross cartography lines, these are particularly powerful. And then you get an even bigger impact when they cross ley lines. Now,
Okay, I just want to take you back a little bit because that's quite a lot of information. So just to recap, what we're doing with the astrocartography is we're checking where in the world, at the moment of birth, any of the planets in the chart might be rising at the MD, and setting and on the IC, obviously because angles are such powerful and important points of the chart. So this is what astrocartography does, but we're talking about astrolocality, which is always the heart of the matter, is the place of birth. And then from there, all of the lines are
Yeah.
being projected out in different directions.
Yes.
So let's just get a sense of what that would look like. So let's imagine that somebody is born with the sun in, not at an angle, but in, let's say, a cadent house like the ninth house. So if the sun is in the ninth house, what would that mean in terms of how the lines are going out? Is it heading southwest? What's happening?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's easy to start with a planet on the angles. So let's say the sun's on the midheaven. So that would, say in London, so we're generating a line that goes north-south through London. That's the sun line because it's on the angle, it's on the 10th house. Now, if you then go 30 degrees, say the ninth house cusp, you're moving 30 degrees. So the angle is skewed northeast, southwest. So, and so on. So if you've got, say, the sun in the 8th house, you'd go around about 60 degrees. Sun on the 7th house cusp, it's on the horizon, so it runs east-west. So it's basically like that. So it's easy to get in mind if you've got the sun on an angle, and then in the 2nd or 3rd house, it's slightly skewed. Each house, roughly equal house system, will be 30 degrees off those angles, and it just describes those lines then.
Okay, so we can see how how we would see it. It's there. We can see the line.
Yeah.
How would we use this? Why is it important? Because if we've got a line going north-south and that's a sun line, are we saying that we would best live in the area of the city that is a pure north-south? What are we saying here? What is the relationship?
Yeah. Okay, so everything, the meanings all derive from the horoscope. So let's say one has got a very sun with Jupiter, a very in Leo, say, and with no difficult aspects. You'd expect those sun lines, the towns and cities that line goes through, would be where that person would shine. They're going to be in their element. They're going to be in their joy. They're happy. Everything seems to fall into place for them. Now, let's say somebody has got their sun square Saturn, say, or square Pluto, what you'd expect to be slightly more challenging. It would be, the line is still a sun line. It's still where you should shine, where you can achieve, if you like, what your sole purpose was, why you came to incarnate in the first place. The sun would give you all that information, but it would be more challenging. So it wouldn't necessarily flow, and there'd be a bit more in terms of psychological work on the self to get over what obstacles might be in the way. Life might be a bit harder to achieve the goals on those lines. But the basic meaning of the sun stays the same for everybody's chart. It's just easier to express for some than others, depending on how the chart works. So we always have to come back to the horoscope and its interpretation, and then add another layer on. So astrocartography, locality, give a couple more layers onto interpreting the chart.
So if we're thinking, for instance, about the examples you just gave, Sun-Jupiter conjunction versus a Sun-Saturn square, we know what that means in terms of the psychology behind it and how the person's going to experience that energy in their lives. But are we then saying that that energy is most potent on that sun line? So that what you've now explained is that line would stretch right across the world. So if that line stretches right across the world, does that mean that wherever that line is in the world is where the Sun-Jupiter conjunction or the Sun-Saturn Sun-Saturn square, as in our examples, would be most intensely experienced?
Yeah. Now, of course, the chart unfolds, and we're not always trying to shine. We're not always in public view or achieving our sole purposes. We might want to have a challenge. We might want to go on adventure. We might want to do something or go on holiday, and we're thinking about other things, making money on business or romance or whatever. So these other elements in the chart are pushing psychologically for expression. Now, if we're aligned to our intuition and our sole purpose, we might then follow those lines and be in the right place at the right time. What astrocartography and locality does is it consciously helps us to evaluate and go with the flow of our chart as it wants to unfold. So we have, if you like, a divine blueprint, and it's always trying, and the universe is always helping us to express it, so we fulfill what we came to do. Now, we don't always achieve the potential that the horoscope shows, but this astro mapping gives us another element or more insight into who we really are, because that's what it's kind of really telling us, that we need an experience, and we might need a Saturnian experience. So it might be important for us to think, hang on a minute, I'm being drawn to this place, but it's on my Saturn line. And I'm having a Saturn return. You know. I'll maybe give you an example. I did a lot of work with footballers, and I did a lot of work on team dynamics and putting teams together using astrology, and it works very well. And a lot of the recruitment teams kind of use it to when they're buying players. Of course, they're not allowed to talk about it, but behind the scenes, they are doing that. But there was something, so you get the team dynamics right, but there's something missing. And I noticed that players were saying, they're supposed to play well here, they should have beat that team, but they had an off day. But it weren't an off day. Every time they played on that ground, they got injured, something went wrong, they never played the best, and they called it their unlucky grounds, or their lucky ground, where they always scored a goal. So when I looked into that, it was they were playing on a Pluto line or a Chiron line, and they got injured. So I'll just give an example of David Beckham, who I'm sure everybody's come across David Beckham. Great success as a footballer, made his name in Manchester, did really well, England international, went to Los Angeles, did really well there, went to Milan, did well there, went to Paris, did well there. It followed his Mars line around the world. So his career unfolded on his Mars line. But he had 4 bad years. When he was 27, there's obviously a Saturn connection here. He was having his Saturn return, and he's a Taurian, so he's got the Sun in Taurus and Mars in Pisces. So Mars being the footballer's planet, he was following his dream. And Mars took him around the world, gave him fame and wealth. So when he was 27, 28, he was offered 125 million contract to go to Madrid, and he went. It was his Saturn return, and Madrid is on his Saturn line. So on his Saturn return, he was taken almost by Saturn to Madrid. When he got there, he played badly. The fans were disappointed in him. He got isolated, humiliated. He was in the reserves for one period of time. He had to train on his own. He didn't do very well at all. So that's how Saturn can work out. But after the experience, He went then from Madrid to Paris, and he was a changed man. So the Saturn experience really, and he's a Taurian, so it taught him a lot about values. So his values really changed with the Saturn experience. So as an individual, he sort of really grew. In his season in Paris, all his money, I think he had 4 million for one season, he gave it to a children's charity. So he took no money. And since then, he's been involved in philanthropy. So although certainly it was a difficult experience for him, but on a spiritual level, it was quite transformational. So that's just an example of how it can work.
Well, that's taken me into a kind of different direction as a line of thought, which would be this could be very useful for a business. Obviously, you're talking about a sports team there, football team. And if we had the chart for the football team, we have a pretty good idea of where they might struggle.
Yes,
They were
yeah,
playing matches in different places. But in terms of a business, this could be very useful if we're thinking about international connections.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Businesses have their own chart, yeah, as well as individuals. You might look at the CEO's chart as well as the business chart, and whoever's the running the show taking decisions, you might look at that person's chart too. And then obviously, you might be looking at Mercury in terms of good aspects to Mercury in that person's chart, or where the business might flourish, and good transits from Jupiter. And then when should we stop expanding, consolidate, because we've got a Saturn situation coming. So with football teams are big business. They're multi-billion-pound businesses. So, and they do use it. Not so much. The top teams in England use it. Other teams across the world use it for buying and selling players, because you can't afford to. I mean, some teams are paying 100 and 150 million for a player, and you can't afford to get it wrong.
So I'm just taking in what you've just said, and I've lost my train of thought there. But okay, so we can see how this is useful for businesses. And I just have these visions of football teams getting the dates of birth for potential players to see how they're going to work out in their areas. Um,
Yeah.
that would be interesting. But sometimes we want to relocate
Yes.
and we don't know why necessarily, apart from the fact that we really don't want to be where we are anymore. And we may be drawn to particular areas. If we're thinking about relocation, there's so many things to take into consideration. Work and relationships,
Yeah.
family, etc. Where would you recommend people start if they're wanting to relocate and they're using Astrolocality?
Yeah. Well, by and large, a moon line is a good line because it's the family, it's emotional contentment, ancestors, and you can sort of settle there. It's like good for emotional contentment. So by and large, you would say the moon line. We have to sort of mention, or I have to mention, the limitations of astrolocality. Yeah, it is based on the birth chart, but the maps that we use, you have to be aware of the map that you're using, because all maps have got a certain amount of distortion in them. So, by and large, in England, the Mercator map is used. That's the one that everybody's come across at school. And that's the one that we use. But if you look at the Mercator map, you'll see that England's as big as Spain on the Mercator map, but Spain's twice as big. So you might want to use Peter's world map if you were doing it yourself, because the areas are accurate. So Spain's twice as big. It's twice as big on the Peter's world map. The problem, the distortion with the Peter's map is that the angles between countries. So if you're thinking of going abroad, you wouldn't use the Peter's map because the angles between countries are different. The British use the Mercator map because of the Royal Navy, and the angles, you could get to where you meant to be going. Digital maps have still got a bit of distortion too, so you just got to be aware. And so if you're making a big move, like a house, move your family, you'd want to go and check that it feels like it's supposed to feel in your horoscope before you made that big decision. Or if you're moving a business and it involving lots of people and lots of investment, then you check it out first.
It just occurs to me that really when we're wanting to relocate, we need to have a set of priorities as to what we are looking for. And looking at a birth chart, it's full of nice little squares, oppositions, trines.
Yes.
Could mean that we want to go and live in a particular place because it offers peace and quiet, but that goes counter to what actually drives us in terms of career. So if we're looking at astrolocality, how can we resolve these inner tensions that we have? Because it seems to me that if we follow the line, so if I was to follow my moon line and say, I'm just going to go and live there, my moon happens to be square Chiron.
Yes.
And although my moon is in the 4th, Chiron's in the 7th, is that going to be okay for my partner? So how do we resolve these tensions?
Yeah, okay. That's a good question. It depends on how self-aware you are. Obviously, you are, and you know that there's a potential there for it to be a challenge to your health or your relationships. But you also know that Chiron's on a 50-year cycle, and you know when it's active and when it's not active. So that's a factor. It's best to give you a couple of examples, really, how it works in practice. Somebody was an alternative therapist and asked me about where she's not happy. She wasn't happy. The business were doing fantastic, doing very, very well. Loads of clients doing really well, but she wasn't happy. She couldn't make, friends socially. Neighbours were difficult. Generally unhappy, but the business were doing really well. She was living on a Chiron line, so it was fantastic for her alternative therapy business, but happiness not so much. So the question was, she was definitely going to move. She'd got the money that she needed. She was at a stage in life where she just wanted social happiness, meeting people, going to parties and podcasting, doing various things in her way. And so I looked at that and I thought, well, you think, well, she's a Libran person, she's got Venus in Libra, lots of stuff in Libra. I thought, well, obviously the Venus line looks like it's the place to be. So she thought, yeah, and it went through the Isle of Wight. So we thought, oh, I love the Isle of Wight. And so it answered itself, really. She went to the Isle of Wight. She had a fantastic time, but this was a factor that we didn't look at. The husband, he didn't really feel that he fitted in. So they moved again. But yeah, so it was fantastic for her. The question about Karen and affecting other people is right. But some of these lines get activated. And so a Chiron line with a footballer, I'll mention a footballer again, Michael Owen, he did really well at Liverpool. He was born in Chester, in Sagittarian, Mars in Virgo. Sagittarians seems to be very sensitive to Chiron lines. Obviously, Chiron's a centaur, the Archer and Sagittarius, and there is, the symbolism tells you that for a Sagittarian, one must give particular attention to what Chiron's doing. Unfortunately for Michael, kind of a superstar, he signed for Newcastle, and that was on his Chiron line, and within days he was injured. And sort of his career was blighted after that point. But having looked at it, he'd played in Newcastle before, never got injured. But when he did get injured, he was sat in the square Chiron, and it was activated. So you can go to these places, and you can maybe have 3 or 4 years, and then the transit comes in and it's activated. And if it's very challenging in your chart, then it'll be a bit of a struggle. The high side of Chiron, of course, is it turns us inwards to find out what our spiritual gifts are. And it was good for him. He cut his career short by quite a bit, but he, as you might guess, he became a racehorse owner, and he's very successful.
I love it. Yes, Sagittarius.
Yeah.
This is brilliant.
So
Okay.
Chiron did him a favour. It didn't seem a favour at the time, and it ruined his, that side of his life. But there you go.
Well, sometimes we think we know what's best for us,
Right.
but life steps in to tell us otherwise.
Yes.
You mentioned right at the start ley lines. Now, firstly, for those who aren't familiar with ley lines, what are they?
Okay. So the ley line is an alignment of sacred structures. It might be like Stonehenge or Avebury, but it's cathedrals and churches that are put into alignment at nodal points on an earth energy line, really. So in China they might call them dragon lines. Here we just call them earth energy lines. And it's how energy moves in the earth, that does affect us. So the earth energy lines affect us on an emotional and sometimes on a physical level. Now, the north-south lines say we've got 2 or 3 major lines in Britain. There's a north-south ley line, energy line. It's called the Bolinas line that goes through Isle of Wight. This lady who went there, her Venus line was even more intensely activated by being on the Bolinas line. So everything went super for her, but there you go. And so, so these north-south lines have got a different kind of energy to the ones that run east-west. So the north-south lines are very powerful. Esoteric writers and researchers would say, because they're bringing in stellar electrical energy, and the sacred sites kind of grounding it. So like places like Manchester and Birmingham, Inverness, they're all on the Bolinas line. And if you look back in history, a lot of, the sort of industrial revolution, things like that, projecting power into the world happens on these lines. Now, the east-west energy lines are more spiritual. So you get a more spiritual vibe on the ley lines that run east-west. So, for example, the Michael and Mary line that runs from Cornwall through to Hopton on the East Anglian coast, through Bury St Edmunds and Dragon Hill. So Dragon Hill is a crossing point. So George and the Dragon, for example. So one of the symbols for a ley line, an energy line, is a dragon. And we've got a crossing point of 2 of the major lines in Britain at Dragon Hill at Uffington, where, I don't know if you've been, but well, it's a place worth having a look at, because there's the hill where St. George slayed the dragon. Now, it's not what it appears to be, of course. It's, So George, when you look at the word, is geo. So George is not the, what we're told really. He's an earth worker, and he's grounding this. So the pole is not killing the dragon. If you look at the old drawings, the dragon is receptive to this stellar energy that's coming through. So these lines are being activated by stellar energy. So the east-west lines, in a nutshell, they are spiritual. And if you're on a spiritual journey, and they cross some of your own projected lines, they're interesting places to explore.
So that's interesting because you're talking about now kind of connecting the two.
Yeah.
So that it's the combination of the ley lines when they intersect with one of our own astrolocality lines. Well,
Yes.
that's absolutely brilliant. Can you recommend any software that people might look for?
Well, I haven't found a good app. Maybe somebody can tell me if there's a good app. But Solar Fire is a good one that you can get most of. They don't have the ley lines on, but it generates good astrolocality and cartography lines. That's the one I use. That's a very good one. You can do it by hand, though, of course, if you wanted to. It's a bit more laborious.
Just a bit. And I do know also that astro.com do produce astrocartography maps too. So people can have a look there for those. Well, Alan, if people want to find you, how do they do that?
Well, they can email me if I can leave you an email address. We've got a website because I work with Christine Chalklin. We work together on autumns. And we've got a website called yourguidinglight.com.
Yourguidinglight.com.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be putting a link to that in the description box. And thank you very much for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're looking at Egypt and astrology. Until then, goodbye.